When a devoted maid discovers a forgotten letter hidden inside her wealthy employer's safe, she uncovers a devastating secret. The humble gardener everyone overlooks is, in fact, the lost son of the most powerful man in the city. Caught between guilt, lies, and redemption, the truth she reveals shatters an empire, but also gives back to a family what silence had stolen: the right to love and be forgiven. Before we continue, subscribe now to the channel to receive powerful, heart-touching stories every day. Rain stitched silver threads across the windows of Holloway Manor, the kind of steady drizzle that made the whole hill seem to hover. In the marble foyer, Amelia Torres, 41, moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who knew the house's heartbeat, polishing the banister, straightening portraits, softening any sharp edge that pride had left behind. She noticed everything and spoke almost nothing. Upstairs, a grandfather clock measured out a life of discipline. Downstairs, the scent of lemon oil and old paper hinted at rooms that preferred the past. In the West Wing, Richard Holloway, 68, wrote notes in a tight, merciless scrawl, the same hand that signed mergers and severances as if they were synonyms. In his shadow, Jonathan, 30, scrolled headlines with a smirk that said he owned tomorrow. The house looked perfect. It only sounded lonely. Amelia carried a silver tray toward Richard's office, careful not to clink the cups. She passed the portrait of Eleanor Holloway, all pearl and grace, her painted eyes following like a rumor. Outside the French doors, Thomas, 36, trimmed hedges in the rain with the patience of a man who believed in straight lines. Amelia paused, watching him through the glass. The set of his shoulders, the open, unguarded face no one in this house had learned to fear. A draft slid under the office door and lifted the hem of her apron. Somewhere in the walls, a loose vent hummed like a kept secret. She balanced the tray, knuckles whitening, and told herself, again, that good workers survive by not remembering what they saw. Richard didn't look up when she entered. "Leave it," he said, and the word landed like a stamp. Amelia obeyed, crossing to the credenza, then stopped. The antique safe beneath the bookshelf, always shut, always still, rested with its iron door not quite flush. A breath's width of darkness showed between steel and frame, thin as a blade. She set the tray down without a sound, staring at that narrow seam as if it stared back. The clock in the hall struck the half hour. Somewhere outside, Thomas's shears clicked to a halt. Amelia exhaled, reached to nudge the door closed, and felt cool air drift from inside, carrying the dusty, papery scent of something that had been waiting. Amelia hesitated, her fingers resting on the edge of the safe. The door wasn't locked, just slightly ajar, like a mouth unsure whether to speak or stay silent. She glanced toward the hallway. The echo of Richard's footsteps had faded. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock and the muted rain pressing against the glass. Her pulse quickened. For 15 years, she had cleaned every corner of Holloway Manor, except this one. Inside the safe, papers lay neatly stacked, contracts sealed with precision, but beneath them, something broke the order. An old envelope, yellowed with age, sealed in red wax and marked in elegant cursive. Eleanor Holloway, 1997. Amelia froze. The handwriting felt alive, as if it carried breath from the woman whose portrait still hung in the hall. Eleanor, Richard's late wife, the soul the manor pretended to honor but rarely spoke of. Her conscience whispered to stop, but curiosity spoke louder. She lifted the envelope, its wax cracking like a brittle secret. Her hands trembled as she turned it over in the light. What harm could it do, after all these years? She unfolded the paper and began to read. The first line was gentle, a wife's voice reaching across time. But the words that followed twisted the air around her. If you are reading this, Richard, then the truth has finally refused to stay buried. Thomas is not the gardener's son. He is yours. The room tilted. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes raced down the page, devouring the confession of a love hidden, a child denied, a promise broken for the sake of a name. Each word shattered something sacred. She pressed the paper to her chest, trembling. The sound of footsteps echoed again, heavier, closer. Richard was returning. The safe door hung open like a wound. Amelia folded the letter with shaking hands, her heartbeat louder than the storm outside. She slipped the paper into her apron pocket just as the office door opened. Richard entered, still on a phone call, his tone clipped and cold. A man managing crises he'd never allow anyone else to see. Amelia lowered her eyes, bowing slightly as he passed. He didn't notice the open safe, didn't see the fear behind her stillness. When he left again, she locked the door behind him and leaned against it, trying to steady her breath. She took out the letter once more, her eyes tracing Eleanor's handwriting through the blur of tears. Each line painted a truth more terrible than the last. Richard had forced his wife to hide the child, paying the doctor and the midwife to disappear the record. Eleanor had begged him to claim his son, but power had cost him compassion. Her final words were written in uneven ink. You built your empire on a lie, Richard. But one day, he will walk these halls as if they were his own, and perhaps then, you'll see the man you could have been. Amelia pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Thomas. The name echoed in her mind. The gardener who smiled at everyone, who fixed what was broken and never asked for more. She glanced out the window where he still worked beneath the rain, unaware that the soil beneath his feet was his inheritance. The truth pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat. She could not unknow it now. Behind her, the grandfather clock struck 6. The echo filled the empty room, long and hollow. Amelia placed the letter back into her pocket, her decision not yet formed, but her fate already sealed. She turned off the lamp, leaving the office in half shadow, and whispered to herself, some secrets don't stay buried forever. The rain had stopped, but the air still clung heavy around Holloway Manor, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Amelia moved through the quiet corridors like a ghost, her hands trembling beneath her gloves. The letter seemed to burn inside her pocket, a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. Every sound made her flinch. The creak of the floor, the whisper of the wind through the vents, the far-off hum of the old pipes. Down in the garden, Thomas worked by the hedges, sleeves rolled, earth streaked across his forearms. 36, calm and humble, he was the kind of man who found peace in small details, a straight edge, a clean cut, a day's work done right. He waved when he saw her through the glass doors, his smile open and easy. Amelia tried to return it, but the weight of what she knew pressed the gesture flat. How do you look at a man and see a secret that could shatter a dynasty? She slipped out to the terrace, rain still dripping from the eaves. Thomas, she called softly. He looked up, the sun glinting in his damp hair. You've been out here since dawn, she said, her voice careful. Go rest a bit. You'll catch cold. He laughed. I've had worse. This place doesn't fix itself. His tone was light, but his eyes were kind, the kind that never asked questions, maybe because life had already given too many wrong answers. Amelia almost told him everything right then. Almost. But from the upper balcony, a shadow shifted. Richard stood there, watching them both. Their eyes met for a second, hers full of fear, his sharp with suspicion. He turned away without a word, disappearing behind the curtains. Amelia's heart pounded. The secret wasn't just hers anymore. It was waking up inside the house, restless and alive. By nightfall, Holloway Manor had changed its mask. The chandeliers blazed, the silver gleamed, and the dining hall echoed with the brittle laughter of people pretending they still had control. Richard Holloway, 68, sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, voice precise, every syllable another command disguised as conversation. Across from him, Jonathan, 30, scrolled on his phone, disinterested, his wine untouched. Amelia moved silently between them, refilling glasses, setting plates, her mind miles away. In the safe, in the letter, in the ink-stained truth that now lived inside her apron. The folded envelope pressed against her waist with every step, a quiet heartbeat beneath fine china and false smiles. She could barely breathe. "Thomas," Richard said suddenly, glancing down the table. The gardener stood awkwardly at the doorway, cap in hand, summoned to repair a flickering wall sconce. "Don't just stand there, man. Get on with it." His tone sliced the air. Thomas nodded, stepping inside, unaware that the man ordering him around was his own father. Amelia's hand trembled, the wine nearly spilled. Richard noticed. "You're nervous, Amelia. Something wrong?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Every instinct screamed to speak, to tell the truth, end the farce. Yet the fear in her chest clamped shut like the safe had once done. "No, sir," she managed. "Just tired." The dinner dragged on in slow, aching time. Jonathan mocked the staff. Richard barely reacted. Thomas fixed the light and left quietly, his presence swallowed by marble and money. When the last plate was cleared, Amelia turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped her. "Before you go," he said, without looking up, "lock the office when you clean it tomorrow. I don't like things disturbed." Her breath caught. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. She nodded, forcing calm. "Of course, sir." But as she walked away, her fingers brushed the letter through the fabric of her apron. The secret pulsed there, wild and alive, whispering that silence wouldn't protect her much longer. Morning came dressed in fog. The gardens of Holloway Manor looked almost holy beneath the pale light, but the beauty only made the guilt heavier. Amelia Torres stepped outside with a basket of fresh linens, pretending to work, though her eyes kept drifting toward the greenhouse where Thomas tended the roses. She had barely slept. The words of Eleanor's letter still echoed behind her ribs. "He will walk these halls as if they were his own." Thomas hummed quietly as he worked, sleeves rolled up, hair damp with mist. His kindness seemed effortless, the kind of soul that saw beauty even in things that had been neglected. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "You're up early," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. "Couldn't sleep?" Amelia hesitated. "Not much, no." She looked around to make sure they were alone, then lowered her voice. "Thomas, if you ever learned something about this place, about yourself, that could change everything, would you want to know?" He tilted his head, a faint laugh escaping him. "What kind of question is that?" "One that matters," she said softly. Thomas looked at her more closely now, sensing the storm behind her calm. "You sound like you've seen a ghost, Amelia." "Maybe I have," she whispered. Before she could continue, the sound of footsteps cut through the quiet. Richard Holloway appeared at the far end of the garden path, cane in hand, his sharp eyes narrowing at the sight of them together. "Thomas," he called, his tone cold and clipped. "I didn't hire you for conversation." Thomas straightened. "Yes, sir." He gave Amelia a small, confused nod before walking away. Richard's gaze lingered on her, heavy and suspicious, before he turned back toward the house. Amelia stood frozen among the roses, the scent suddenly suffocating. The letter in her apron pocket felt like it had grown heavier overnight. The truth wanted to be heard, and now she wasn't sure she could keep it silent much longer. By late afternoon, The house had grown restless. The air inside Holloway Manor seemed to hum, as if the walls themselves could sense the lie pulsing beneath the surface. Amelia Torres dusted the grand staircase with deliberate care, her every movement cautious, rehearsed, anything to keep her thoughts from running wild. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. From the library doorway, Richard Holloway, 68, stood half-hidden in shadow, studying her. His sharp blue eyes followed every motion, every pause. The safe, the letter, the way she avoided his gaze, it all painted a picture he didn't like. "You've been distracted lately," he said finally, stepping into the light. "Something I should know about?" Amelia kept her tone steady. "No, sir. Just the usual chores." He moved closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. "Strange. You've been here 15 years, and I've never seen you make a mistake, until yesterday." Her pulse spiked. "A mistake? The coffer in my office. It wasn't closed properly." His eyes didn't blink. "I assume you had no reason to be near it." Amelia's throat tightened. "Of course not." He smiled faintly, but it wasn't kind. "Good. Because what's in that safe is worth more than anyone's life in this house." He adjusted his cufflinks, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "And I don't forgive thieves. Or liars." He left her standing there, the faint echo of his cane tapping down the corridor like a heartbeat fading into distance. For a long moment, Amelia didn't move. Then, from outside the window, she saw Thomas, 36, passing with a tray of tools, unaware of the storm building around him. The sight broke something inside her. The truth was now ablaze, and Richard's warning had just sharpened its edge. She knew what he was capable of, and if he suspected anything, Thomas wouldn't be safe. That night, Holloway Manor seemed alive with whispers. Wind scraped against the windows. Doors groaned as if remembering every secret ever spoken within those walls. Amelia Torres, still in her uniform, paced her small attic room, the folded letter trembling in her hands. She'd read it 3 more times by candlelight, each word pressing harder against her conscience. "Thomas is not the gardener's son. He is yours." She tried to tell herself it wasn't her place, that some truths were poison when spoken aloud. But she couldn't stop thinking of Thomas, of the way he smiled at everyone, of how he never once complained about the life he'd been handed. He deserved to know. He had to know. A sudden knock made her freeze. She hid the letter beneath her pillow. "Who is it?" "It's me," came Thomas's voice, quiet but urgent. She opened the door, startled to see him standing in the dim hall, hair still damp from the rain, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Sorry," he said, lowering his voice. "Didn't mean to scare you. Mr. Holloway's been asking questions. About yesterday. About you." Amelia's stomach dropped. "He suspects." Thomas nodded. "He didn't say much, but he's not himself tonight. You should stay away from him for a while." Amelia looked down, torn between fear and the need to speak. "Thomas, there's something I have to." He stopped her gently. "Whatever it is, it can wait until morning. You look pale." Their eyes met, and for a brief second, she almost told him everything. About the letter, the secret, the lie that tied their lives together. But she couldn't. Not yet. "You should go," she whispered. Thomas gave her a small nod and stepped back into the hallway. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Whatever's troubling you, it'll make sense tomorrow." As his footsteps faded, Amelia locked the door and pressed her back against it, breathing hard. In her mind, one thought grew louder than the storm outside. Tomorrow may be too late. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray fog, the kind that blurred the horizon and made Holloway Manor look like it was floating above the world. Amelia Torres woke early, though she hadn't really slept. The letter felt like a heartbeat beneath her pillow, pulsing through every thought. She dressed quickly and moved through the halls, her steps light and careful, listening for danger. From the grand staircase, she caught sight of Richard Holloway in the study below. The fire was already burning, though it was barely dawn. He stood by the window, a glass of scotch in hand, staring out at the fog. He looked different this morning, slower, heavier, haunted. On his desk lay the open safe key. The sight made Amelia's chest tighten. When she entered to bring his breakfast tray, he didn't turn around. "Tell me," he said quietly, "how long have you worked here?" 15 years, sir." He nodded slowly. "Loyalty like that is rare. But loyalty," he added, turning toward her now, "is only proven when temptation knocks." Her breath caught. I don't understand." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't insult my intelligence, Amelia. You were in this room. You touched what wasn't yours." His eyes flicked toward the safe. "I could have you dismissed. Or worse." Amelia's hands shook, the tray trembling. "I didn't take anything, sir." Richard's gaze lingered on her face, cold and calculating, the way a judge studies a guilty soul before passing sentence. "Then tell me why the lock was turned, yet nothing is missing." Before she could answer, the door opened. Thomas, 36, still in his work clothes, stepped inside. "Sorry, Mr. Holloway," he said. "I came to fix the radiator. You asked yesterday." His timing was unintentional, but it split the moment like a blade. Richard straightened. Later, he snapped. But Thomas caught the tension, the fear in Amelia's face. He hesitated at the door. "Everything all right?" he asked softly. "Perfect," Richard replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Amelia lowered her gaze, clutching the tray so tightly her knuckles whitened. She wanted to scream for Thomas to leave, to run before Richard's suspicion found its next victim. But her voice wouldn't come. Richard turned back to the window as the fog thickened outside. His reflection in the glass looked older, smaller, almost human. "Secrets," he murmured, "always find their way home." The day bled slowly into evening. By the time the dinner bell rang, a storm had rolled in from the coast, thunder shaking the chandeliers of Holloway Manor. The dining hall flickered with candlelight and tension. Richard Holloway, 68, sat at the head of the table like a man guarding a throne built on glass. Across from him, Jonathan, 30, checked his phone, oblivious to the quiet war forming between his father and the housekeeper who had kept their world spotless for 15 years. Amelia Torres moved between them, steady hands hiding an unsteady heart. Every time she passed the end of the table, her apron brushed the folded letter hidden beneath the fabric. She felt it there, warm, alive, and dangerous. Richard's gaze followed her like a shadow. "Sit," he ordered suddenly. She froze. "Sir." "Sit." His voice left no room for disobedience. Amelia obeyed, lowering herself to the nearest chair. The air thickened. Richard poured 2 glasses of wine, sliding one toward her. "I don't tolerate lies in my house, Amelia, but I do reward honesty." He lifted his glass, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Tell me the truth. What were you doing in my office?" Her pulse throbbed in her throat. "I was cleaning, sir." He leaned closer. "You opened my safe." Amelia's fingers curled against her lap. "I didn't mean to. It was already open." Silence stretched. Then a low laugh escaped him, humorless, sharp. "Do you have any idea what you were playing with?" Before she could answer, the door opened. Thomas, 36, hair wet from the rain, stepped inside holding a file of garden reports. "You called for me, Mr. Holloway?" "No," Richard said. His eyes never left Amelia. "But maybe it's best you're here." Thomas hesitated. "Something wrong?" Amelia looked at him, at the man who had no idea the storm was about to break over his life. Her chest ached. Richard turned, studying Thomas for a long, unbearable moment. Then, With a slow smile, he said, "Sit down, both of you. I think it's time everyone heard a story." Lightning split the sky outside, spilling white light across the table. Amelia's hands trembled around the wine glass. She realized that Richard wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was ready to strike. Thunder rattled the windows as if the sky itself demanded to hear the truth. The lights flickered above the long dining table, throwing shifting shadows across the faces of Richard Holloway, Amelia Torres, and Thomas. 3 lives now circling the same secret. Richard's voice broke the silence first, calm but cold. "You've worked for me for what, 15 years, Amelia? You must have learned by now that everything I own, I protect." He paused, tapping his glass. "Even the past." Thomas frowned. "What is this about?" Amelia's hands clenched under the table. "Mr. Holloway, please, this isn't." Richard cut her off. "You found something that wasn't yours. Something that belongs to this family. I want it back." Her breath caught. She met his gaze. "You mean the letter?" Thomas turned to her. "What letter?" The room froze. Richard's eyes hardened. "So you did read it." Amelia stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the marble. "I had to. Someone deserved to know what you buried." "Careful, Amelia." His tone dropped lower, quieter. "You have no idea what that letter means." Thunder boomed again, shaking the chandeliers. Thomas's confusion turned to alarm. "Tell me," he said, voice rising. "What letter? What are you two talking about?" Amelia's chest heaved. "Thomas, it's about your mother." Richard's fist slammed the table. "Enough." But it was too late. The words had already escaped. Thomas stared at Amelia, then at Richard, trying to piece together the fragments of a story that suddenly didn't fit. "My mother," he repeated. "Why would there be a letter from her here?" Richard's silence said more than words ever could. The storm outside roared louder, wind battering the windows like an angry witness. Thomas rose slowly, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" Amelia looked at him, eyes glistening. "You have a right to know, Thomas. The truth doesn't belong in a safe." Richard stood, his voice cutting through the thunder. "You don't understand what you're inviting, Amelia. Some truths destroy more than they free." Lightning flashed, flooding the room with white light. In that moment, Amelia reached into her apron, and the edge of the letter appeared between her fingers. Richard's face went pale. The storm had found its voice. The flash of lightning illuminated the room just long enough for everyone to see the letter in Amelia Torres's trembling hand. It was fragile, yellowed, sealed once by love, then buried by fear. Richard Holloway stood frozen, the storm painting sharp lines of guilt across his face. Thomas watched them both, his confusion turning into something darker, dread. "Amelia," Richard said softly, "put it down." She didn't move. "You lied to everyone in this house," she said, voice trembling but firm. "To your wife, your son, and even yourself." Thomas frowned. "My mother? What does she have to do with any of this?" Richard's tone sharpened. "Enough. She's gone. There's no reason to drag her memory through the mud." Amelia's eyes flashed. "Then maybe you should have honored her truth before she died." The words struck like thunder. Thomas stepped forward. "What truth?" Amelia's throat tightened. She looked at the letter, then at Thomas, his open, bewildered face, so unaware of the bloodline that had written his fate. She whispered, "You were never just a worker here, Thomas. You were part of this family long before you even knew it." Thomas shook his head, his voice breaking. "What are you saying?" Richard's shout cracked through the room. "Don't you dare!" But Amelia's restraint was gone. The pain, the fear, the injustice, it all burst out in one trembling breath. "She was your mother, Thomas. Eleanor Holloway. And he." She turned toward Richard, eyes full of fire. "He is your father." Silence. Even the storm outside seemed to stop for a moment. The candlelight flickered against their faces, disbelief on Thomas, guilt on Richard, and exhaustion on Amelia. Thomas's lips parted, but no sound came. He stumbled back, his hand gripping the edge of the table. "That's impossible." Amelia's voice softened. She wrote it herself. Every word. "I swear to you, I read it." Richard stepped forward, his face ghostly pale. "You had no right." Amelia looked him dead in the eye. "No, Richard. You had no right to deny a son, to bury the truth, to build a life on someone else's silence." Thunder exploded again, as if the heavens themselves refused to stay quiet. Thomas looked between them, one woman shaking with courage, one man drowning in shame. And then he turned and walked out into the storm, the front door slamming like the end of a verdict. Amelia fell to her knees, clutching the letter. Richard stood still, trembling, his empire suddenly meaningless. The truth had finally been spoken, and there was no taking it back. Rain poured over the estate like judgment. The iron gates of Holloway Manor glistened under flashes of lightning as Thomas stormed down the path, his breath ragged, his mind a storm louder than the one above him. "Son." The word refused to settle. Every memory, every command Richard had barked, every small kindness he'd dismissed, rewrote itself in an instant. His hands shook. He wanted to scream, but the night swallowed every sound. Inside the mansion, Amelia Torres knelt beside the dining table, tears mixing with rain that leaked through a cracked window. The letter lay open before her like a wound. The candlelight danced across the inked confession. "He will walk these halls as if they were his own." She pressed her hand over the words. "He deserves to know peace," she whispered, her voice breaking. Across the room, Richard Holloway stood at the fireplace, his reflection shaking in the glass. The man who had controlled boardrooms and bent politicians to his will now looked small, not powerful, just old and afraid. "You think you've done something noble?" he said, voice hoarse. "You've destroyed him." Amelia turned slowly, her face pale but resolute. "No, Richard. You destroyed him the day you chose your name over your soul." He didn't answer. His hand trembled as he poured another glass of scotch, but it clattered to the floor before reaching his lips. For the first time, his silence felt like punishment rather than power. Thomas didn't return that night. Hours passed, the house cold and still. Richard sank into the armchair by the fire, staring at nothing, haunted by the echo of a truth he had buried for 36 years. Amelia cleaned in silence, her heart aching but unbroken. Somewhere deep in her mind, she prayed that Thomas would find somewhere warm, somewhere far from this house that had never shown him mercy. But when dawn crept through the curtains, the first light of morning revealed something she hadn't expected. The front gates were open. A single muddy footprint led back toward the manor. Thomas had returned. The early light of dawn slipped through the mist, painting the gardens of Holloway Manor in faded gold. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and regret. Amelia Torres, exhausted from a sleepless night, stood at the kitchen window when she saw him. Thomas, 36, walking slowly up the gravel path. His clothes were soaked, his face pale, but his eyes carried something new. Not anger, not shock, something deeper, clarity. She ran to the door, relief breaking through her restraint. "Thomas," she whispered, stepping into the cold morning air. "You shouldn't have come back." He looked at her, his voice low and steady. "I had to. There are things that need to be said." Before she could answer, the sound of a cane echoed from the marble hall. Richard Holloway, 68, appeared at the top of the steps, still wearing last night's clothes, his face hollow, his pride gone. He stopped when he saw Thomas standing below. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I thought you'd gone for good," Richard said quietly. I tried, Thomas replied. But that letter, he reached into his pocket and pulled it out. The paper crumpled, rain-stained, fragile. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning she never got to have. Richard's jaw tightened. Eleanor wrote that in grief. She didn't understand. Stop, Thomas interrupted, voice sharp. Don't twist her memory to clean your conscience. He took a step closer, his wet boots leaving dark marks on the stone. You hid the truth to protect your name, but all it did was turn this house into a tomb. Richard's eyes glistened, but his voice cracked like broken glass. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't heard her voice every night since she died? His hand trembled on the cane. I wanted to tell you, Thomas. God help me, I did. But I didn't know how. For the first time, Thomas saw not the powerful man who had ruled his life, but a father, weak, flawed, human. He looked down at the letter, smoothing its wet edges. She asked you to love me, he said softly, even if it was too late. Richard's face crumpled. The cane slipped from his hand, clattering onto the stone. Amelia stepped back, tears in her eyes, as father and son stood face to face for the first time, not as master and servant, but as equals. And then, slowly, Thomas extended the letter toward him. This doesn't belong to me, he said. It belongs to you, and to the man you still have a chance to be. Richard took it with shaking hands. The morning wind carried the faint scent of roses from the garden, and for the first time in years, Holloway Manor felt alive. Weeks passed, and the winter light returned soft and golden to Holloway Manor, no longer the cold monument it had once been, but a house finally learning to breathe again. The whispers of scandal had died down. What remained was quieter, purer. In the gardens, Thomas worked among the roses that had once belonged to his mother. He wore the same worn gloves, but his posture carried something new, belonging. Inside, Amelia Torres dusted the portrait of Eleanor Holloway, her reflection merging briefly with the woman in the painting. You kept your promise, she whispered, smiling faintly. Through the open window, she could hear Thomas laughing with the children of the staff, a sound this house had never known. In the study, Richard Holloway, now paler, slower, but somehow lighter, sat at his desk surrounded by stacks of donation papers. The framed family crest above him had been replaced by a simple bronze plaque that read, "Truth is the foundation we should have built on." He looked up as Amelia entered. "It's done," he said softly. "The Holloway Foundation, homes for children without names, without families." He paused, his voice trembling. "For the ones I ignored." Amelia nodded, her eyes kind. Eleanor would have been proud. Richard looked toward the window, where Thomas stood talking with a group of gardeners, his laughter carried by the wind. "He's better than I ever was," Richard murmured. That's all any father could hope for. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Two people who had lived in the shadow of someone else's secret, now bathed in the quiet mercy of forgiveness. Then, slowly, Richard rose from his chair, took his cane, and walked outside. Thomas turned as his father approached, the winter sun catching the silver in both their hair. No grand speeches, no apologies rehearsed, just two men standing in the open, breathing the same air for the first time. "Roses need pruning soon," Thomas said, smiling. "I know," Richard replied. "Maybe you can teach me how." Their laughter echoed down the path, soft and unguarded, the kind of sound that makes a house feel human again. Spring arrived at Holloway Manor, and for the first time in decades, the gates no longer felt like walls. They felt like an invitation. The gardens bloomed in quiet defiance of everything the past had buried. Laughter replaced echoes, warmth replaced fear. What once was a house of silence had become a home reborn. In the main corridor, sunlight poured through stained glass. painting soft colors over a new frame mounted where the Holloway family crest once hung. Inside the frame rested Eleanor's letter, carefully preserved behind glass. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "So the truth will never again need to hide." Amelia Torres stood before it, her eyes misted with pride and peace. Years of servitude had carved strength into her, but this moment gave her something she had never expected: freedom. Behind her, Thomas entered, now in a tailored vest and rolled sleeves, the air of a man who belonged exactly where he stood. "She'd be happy, you know," Amelia said softly. "She already is," Thomas replied. "Every rose that blooms here. It's her way of forgiving us all." From the veranda, Richard Holloway, cane in hand, watched them both. He looked older, yes, but lighter, as if every confession had lifted years from his soul. He smiled faintly as Thomas joined him, side by side beneath the archway where the storm once raged. "Think the manor's big enough for all this laughter?" Richard asked. Thomas chuckled. "Barely, but I think that's the point." Their eyes met. No crowns, no titles, just understanding. As the camera pulled back, the manor glowed under the afternoon sun. Children played in the distant garden, workers chatted, and for the first time, every window reflected life instead of shadows. A soft narration closed the story. Sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy, it redeems. And when love finds the courage to speak, even the darkest house can learn to shine again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, leave your like, and share this video so that more people can discover that even the smallest act of courage can change the world. Write in the comments, "I believe in the power of courage." Together, let's spread stories that transform lives and prove that hope can rise from the most unexpected voices. Thank you so much for your support.